Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. My name is Andrei Shevkun. Today I'm going to be going over some basic, but a little more intermediate chess concepts. First of all, I wanted to say Happy New Year's to everyone. I know I'm a little late, however, it still has to be said. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to explain some beginner slash intermediate concepts to the game of chess. Today we're going to be learning some basic concepts such as a pin, a fork, um, a back mate, and just other cons and many different mating concepts. For example, how to mate with a rook, how to mate with a queen, how to ladder mate, and stuff like that. Okay, let's. I'm going to be usually presenting just a basic idea and then an in game situation. So, the first example of this is a pin. What is a pin? A pin is when a piece connects another piece. A piece connects a piece to another piece, if that makes sense. For example, in this situation, the bishop pins the queen to the king. So the queen cannot move. If the queen were to move, we would just take the king. So that's just an illegal move. So here, the bishop is just able to take the queen. Easily. Let's look at a different in-game situation here. An in-game situation of this could be this. This is a little different, as this time, this bishop is pinning the knight to the queen. This means that the knight is able to move. However, if it does, you will be losing a lot of material, as the bishop is able to take the queen. So, you don't necessarily have to have a forcing pin. It's like, the piece isn't able to move, it's just frozen. Like, when you're pinning something to the king. But it could just be a pin to something of higher value. Let's move on. Now, an example of a fork. What is a fork? A fork is when you attack two pieces at the same time, and you're probably going to take one of them. Most of the time, you're going to be taking one of them. So here, we can move the knight here in order to attack the king and the queen at the same time. Since this is forced, the king has to move, as otherwise we just take the king. So this will result in our opponent losing the queen. Let's look at an in-game situation. An in-game situation of this could be the fried liver attack. It's an opening. I'm not going to be going over it, at least not in this video. And here, same thing as the pin. It doesn't necessarily have to be forcing. You're still going to be winning a lot of material by playing the move knight takes pawn on f7. So you just take this pawn. The king isn't able to take it, as it's defended by the bishop, and it's attacking both of these pieces. So, in this situation, usually the player would move the queen, as he doesn't really want to lose it. And here, you're just able to take the rook, winning you a bunch of material. Let's go into the next concept. The next concept is already a mating concept, but it also applies in certain other situations throughout the game. And this is called a battery. A battery is when two pieces are connected together and they're ready to attack together. This can be a rook and a queen, a rook and a rook, two bishops, and they're just both line up and they're ready to go for an attack. Here, this is mate in one, as the queen is just able to go bulldoze the king, and it's defended by the bishop, so it's not able to be taken, and it's mate in one. An in-game situation of this could be this position. Here it's pretty much set up the exact same way. So we can see the bishop and the queen lined up on the same diagonal. So they're just able to bulldoze into the king and just win by mate in one. Let's move on. Then The second concept is just a ladder mate. The second mating concept I wanted to tell you guys about is how to ladder mate. A ladder mate is when you just go boom. It's just when you go side to side in order to checkmate your opponent. There's apparently a faster way to checkmate in this situation, but this is just the simpler way. So all you have to do is go rook here, king has to move as you're checking him, and the king has to get out of the check. Why can't he go here? Because it's protected by this other rook. So these squares are occupied. These squares are occupied, so it only leaves the king with these two options to go. So it can only go to these two squares, and you're just gonna keep doing that. You're just gonna be repeating the same process until you just get the checkmate. Boom. Let's look at the next one. The next one is a back rank mate. A back rank mate is just when the king is boxed in and has pretty much nowhere to go, and you're just gonna be occupying all of its available squares. You're just gonna be attacking all of its available squares with one piece. Now let's look at in-game situation. An in-game situation of this could be the same thing. You just look at this position, you see a rook on an open diagonal, and you know what's gonna happen. All you have to do is slide the rook down, and then since the king has nowhere to is boxed in by the pawns, it can't go into the pawns, it can't take its own pieces, so it has only these three squares that it's able to go to. So the rook just attacks all three of those squares, and it's just mate in one. Now let's go on a little more advanced concept, and that's mating with a king and a queen. So when mating with a king and a queen, all you have to do is pretty much first come close to the king. Here, for example, you can do this. And then once you're like 2 squares away from the king, once you're like this is from the king, as you're occupying all of these squares, the king only has very few options to go to. So from here, wherever he goes to, you mirror. So if he were to go here, you go up. If he goes to he can't go to the right as you're occupying it. So if he goes here, you're gonna push him closer to the board, to the edge of the board. Then if he goes like here, you're gonna copycat him. Actually, no, never mind. You're not going to copycat him. I was about to lose you the entire game because there's a concept called a stalemate. A stalemate is when you're not creating a threat to the king, and the king isn't able to move without being taken. So if I were to copy him in this scenario, I would result in a stalemate, which is a draw. Pretty much, the queen occupies all of these squares, and there's no threat on this square. Like, there's no threat attacking the king. So anywhere it were to move, it's gonna lose. You're just gonna lose. So it's a draw. So in this situation, you have to, like, once the king is on the edge of the board, you have to just leave him 2 squares of where he can go. So he has to go forward and back in these 2 squares, and as your king slowly approaches him, and just once your king is close enough, once your king is like in front of the king, in front of the opposite king, all you have to do is move your queen, defended by the king, in front of the king. So this is mate. As the queen attacks the king, covering all of its squares, and it's defended by the king. Okay, now we're gonna tackle a different concept, which is actually quite hard to understand. So it's how to mate with a king and a rook. So here we have a rook and a king against the king. This is winnable, but you need to know what you're doing. So you have to cut off the king as close to the edge of the board as you can. So and if, for example, which this is a completely losing move for black, but if he moves, but if black were to move closer to the edge of the board, you have to box him in. Like, you have to keep him as close to the edge of the board as you can. If they were not to do that, if they were to just go here, you would start creeping up with your king. So you continue doing that, and look out for your rook, because if I were to just continue moving with the king here, you would just be able to take the rook, and it would be a draw. So once the king is able to take the rook, you would slide it over to the other side of the board. Once you're in a situation like this, you have to cut out the enemy king on as little space as possible. So here you would go f3, rook f3, to only give 4 available squares to your opponent, and he has to go to one of these 3. If he goes to this side of the board, you go king f2, pushing him closer to the side of the board. So the king here has only one legal move, and it's to go to h1, and then here you finish him off with the rook. So you checkmate your opponent like this. But there's also a little bit more of a tricky line if your opponent refuses to go to the edge of the board, where they go g1. What you have to do is check your opponent without being able to be taken. If he goes to h1 or like to the edge of the board, then you're just gonna push your king. And if he goes to this side, you're just gonna do a waiting move, because he only has one legal move, and he's gonna be on the edge of the board, and it's gonna be like a back rank mate, like explained before. He's gonna be boxed in by the king, because I like to imagine it as the king having a force field, if that makes a little bit of sense. Like the enemy king cannot enter this force field, otherwise he loses. So here the king only has one legal move, and is to go to e1, and that would just lose the game entirely. But you don't need to get ahead of yourself and just continuously check your opponent, because that would just lead to a draw. Here you have to play a waiting move, which just doesn't change anything for you. So, for example, rook here. So then you're forcing your opponent to make this move, and now he's boxed in. You just slide your rook down and mate your opponent. Have an awesome afternoon, evening, morning, I don't know, birthday, Christmas. See you some other time.